When we go to the communion table this morning, the provision that God has made for the whole world, where, and I use this example, I may have cited it, if a guy is driving up by here today and he's in sin, and I want to qualify the fact that sickness does not imply that somebody is in sin. It doesn't imply that. And I was going through the things that God does to people when they violate what he says. For example, just to give you a background, it says he will, first of all, he will rebuke you, he will chastise you, he will scourge you. When I go to the communion table, which we're going to be out here in a few minutes, this gets much more severe, because if I'm violating what this book says, this is the only place in the world where I can be cleansed of my behavior. So if a guy is driving up here and he's been out in left field and he looks, geez, maybe I'll go in there this morning. He drives in, he comes in, all of a sudden he's sitting at the communion table, he's a believer, he begins to reflect, and he thought, you know, I ought to deal with this. All of the filth that comes into the church this morning, anything that you've done, when you sit at that communion table, all the anger, the bitterness, the resentment, the bad words, every irritability, if I confess it's under the blood and it's washed away, I leave here clean as a whistle. If I'm violating what this says, it says there are many weak, sick, and sleep. When you get to be scourged by God, scourging becomes the time of the period. That's just prior to this, because what he does, he takes away your family, he takes away your income, he takes away your bread, he takes away your health until he gets your attention, until you repent. If you don't do that, then these three come into play. He makes you weak, he makes you sick, and then you die, you sleep. It says if I go in here and I take of this thing, because this is the only place where God's provision for sin is the blood. That's a literal fact that when I use that and confess it, he washes away all the bad behavior, all the evil that I've been involved in. I can accumulate it again come next week. But this is worldwide. So this guy comes in here, gets convicted. We don't know who he is. He repents. He leaves here clean as a whistle. We never see him again. All over the world, this is the universal situation that God has made for everybody's sin, whether it's in China, Africa, or no matter where you are, that if I confess that, I'm clean. If I drink of that thing and I don't go to God and ask for forgiveness, please read what it says. For your own benefit, you drink to yourself damnation. You say, well, what about saved and so on? So I want to suggest this to you because I don't know the answer to this question, so please don't ask it. The question becomes, knowing what I know, that if I don't act on it to use God's provision, to be washed away, because through this is the only institution on the face of the globe that deals with guilt. If you're a Christian and you've been involved in behavior you shouldn't be involved in, you will feel guilty. If I confess it, the blood will cleanse that. I won't have guilt. But if I drink of this unworthily and I become convicted, don't drink of it if you can't handle whatever it is that God is facing you with. Don't drink of it. If I want to make it right, confess the sin, then drink of it, because I can drink to myself damnation. Why? Because if I sit there with bad past behavior and God makes the provision, it says that I trampled the blood of Christ underfoot and there's no more sacrifice for sin. I don't know what happens to you if you die with sin in your life that you haven't confessed and appropriated the blood of Christ. I don't know what happens to you. You can figure that one out for yourself. But I will say this, God is never going to ambush anybody. Moreover, by them is thy servant warned, and keeping there's great reward. God will warn you every time of an event that's going to happen and give you the opportunity to do this. If you ignore it and you die not appropriating it, I don't know. And so the significance of this is that God has made provisions. This isn't, if I go out here and get these elements and look at them like this, they're worthless. If I have the sense of what God has invested in me so I can do this, it becomes awesome. So I wanted to address this because what God invests in me is time. There are terms that God uses. For example, I have had a thing I've been writing for 2 years. I started it, and it's the most significant expression of God in a relationship that I've ever seen. Won't go into that. But as I wrote it, I had a lot of papers. Some were, and I put them in my closet, and every time I open my closet, there are all those papers, and I keep closing the closet door. And so God began to deal with my heart. You know what? You have just so much time. Jesus, when I look at Paul said, I've finished my course. Every one of us are in our apprenticeship on a course. Solomon said in 1 Kings 6:14, he said he had finished the work God had given him. He finished the temple. Jesus said it is finished. God is only looking for finishers. So as I read that, I said, I got to finish that. So I took it all out, and I got all these papers on my coffee table, and I look at them, and I started writing. Anyway, I felt that this was the weekend I had to finish it, so I closed the door, and I spent 8 hours yesterday finishing it. When I put it on the table, I put a paper clip on it, and I said, it's finished. I went to bed. I'm finishing 2 things this weekend. One I won't go into. I went to bed, and all I could do was praise the Lord that I'd finished it, because part of that time I'd go to bed and it's on my mind. I don't want it on my mind because God's bothering me with that. It's on my mind. It's not in my mind. I have to tweak it, but it's not on my mind. Now, God invests in me at this level. I'm going to make this note. As long as you endure or tolerate a problem, you will not seek a remedy. If I want to start making a change, my conviction is, even as I talk about this, there are things in your life you haven't finished. God will start bringing things to your life even as you speak. The Lord bring things to our lives that we haven't finished so we can get them handled. God begins to look at me in such a way. For example, when I sit at the communion table, I think of if everybody in this room is saved, when you sit there, think of the investment that God made in you on the provision through His Son. That is His investment in you. When you sit out there this morning, you're taking it with you because you have a treasure in earthen vessels. Now, if I don't start to make a change, if you can't tolerate the present, you begin to create your future. And let me say, you never get tomorrow today. As God orients me, and I start to create I think of the time I got. I've made an investment in little people through World Vision. I've kept these little guys now for some period of time. I get pictures of them, and they're getting bigger. God has given me money so that when I looked at these kids, I thought, you know what, I could support some of those little people. I said, why did God give me the money? He says, so you can support little people. Whose? Well, right now they're all from South America. I'd like to get one from each continent. He says, you could do that. I said, why? He said, because I've given you the money. Do you have extra money? Yeah, I said, I have extra money. He said, will you miss it? I said, probably. I want to be honest. Then they sent me a card and said, would you be an ambassador for this? Oh, I thought, man, the last thing I want. God says, look, He says, I'm still investing in you here. Oh, I kept that card and I put it away. Do you know what we waste? How much of what you have do you waste? For example, how much time do you waste? How much money do you waste? Then I got this in the mail. Hungry children in Darfur, the Sudan. And then, of course, you get the pictures. They're emaciated, jaws, flies going across there. And I thought, I looked at that. And this will support this. I thought, you know what? I'd go out and spend $50, $100 to eat out. So I couldn't get that off my mind. God says, I make an investment in you. You know why he says this? He says, because I want you to invest in somebody else. So you know what I did? I invested in the kids in Darfur. Then I get the slaves in the Sudan. And I see the opportunity to buy the slaves out. And so much money will equal so much money that somebody else will add. And these are Christians taken in slavery. You know what I start thinking? Well, if I get them released, you know what's going to happen? They're going to take them again and we'll go to, didn't go away. I look at my checkbook. God says, you have some money there. I said, all of a sudden I'm beginning to think, maybe I wish I didn't have it. Two things begin to happen in God's investment strategy. I know they're talking about money down there, but if God invests in me, he says this, whatever you got in your hand, if you let go of it, he will release what he's got in his hand. Oh, I said, that sounds like investments. He says, maybe someday you'll get the picture. Then I get this from Nigeria. This guy has a little mission out in the sticks. He had some built, and along comes the storm at night and destroys everything. And they say, emergency. Anytime I see emergency, I say, oh, here we go again. You're gonna, there's no pressure. The only pressure you have is if you don't have anything, you won't participate. He says, go over to Galatians chapter 6. Verse 8. Now, there's all kinds of other words that are given to me that I don't read in my economics book. I had a guy in college who was an economics professor. He was the most boring guy that I ever listened to, and his shoes were all scuffed because he sat there, he would stand there and rub one shoe over the other, and we'd all watch him rub his shoes. He'd kind of go like this, rubbing his shoes. And it looked like they were all scratchy. Anyway, be not deceived, God is not mocked, for whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. For he that soweth to his flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption, but he that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap everlasting life. Let us not be weary in well doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. All of a sudden, we've got reaping and sowing and seed and fruit. Everything I'm referring to is what dollars buy. And everything that I'm referring to involves you. Therefore, when I look at this thing, what I begin to see, if I sow a bad seed, I stain my future. Tomorrow never happens today. But what I do today stains tomorrow. So God talks about all kinds of things when he deals with opportunities. He said, you can stain tomorrow because you have blemishes, spots, and wrinkles. Somebody says, what are the blemishes and the spots? God says, you just made some extra money on your stocks. You sold your house, it got your price. All of these types of things, he says, you've got to pay attention. Because anything that God gives me does this. Anything that God gives me This is an interesting concept. Creates more. So if I look at what I don't have, God says you missed the point. He says no matter where you are and what you got, I'll create more. So his program is, most people when you hear them, they say, man, if I had, it never works. God never deals with if I had. He only deals with what I got. He says, if you begin to work in this process, now, one of the things that out here, when we go in here this morning, the investment that God has made in me is planted out here when we sit in these seats. Because he's planted me where I am, he expects me to work in this process of reaping and sowing and seed and fruit. Now, when I saw those immigrants, the first thing I thought was, because I was just getting ready to go, I'll do that next week. As sure as I'm sitting here, God says, you'll never do it next week. You won't do it next week. I thought, well, if next week comes, maybe the weather's bad. I had thought what I will do if I see them, I said, how can I get Spanish tracts? When I saw those tracts, I reached over and grabbed a handful of them. I said, because I want to give some to Tim here, because this is all, or was, I don't know if it's still owned by the immigrants or not. But I can't give it to him without giving him a Pepsi. So dadgummit, I got to drive down and get the Pepsis and walk out. And they don't have little bottles or those little cartons, They got these big bottles. So I walk out with these big bottles of Pepsi, put them in my car, and then when I drive back into the allotment to go around it, I can't find them. I'm thinking, oh boy, I got all these Pepsis. And then finally I start spotting them, and so I could give it out. My first inclination is what? Put it off. Put it off.
Well, Fred, you stopped reading too soon, because that talks about the next verse. If you read in verse 9, it says, and let us not lose heart in doing good, for in due time we shall reap, if we do not grow weary. It's easy for us, like you said, to put it off, to get weary. We get all, it seems like you talk, I don't know if you ever feel weary, it's like you give to something, it seems like you get on the mailing list, don't you? All of a sudden you get requests from all these other organizations. And it's easy to grow.
I tell you, Tim got me into Gideon's. I want to go into Gideon's like a hole in the head. So I go to something, and the guy says, "Oh, you could do." I think back off, Charlie. Don't start saying what I could do. God said, "I got an investment on you." He said, "You could do that." Why remind me? See, I keep saying, enlarge the place of my tents. He says, you're asking that. Stop asking. Shut that down. Because I give you the opportunity. So you know what? I could be an ambassador for those little kids. I thought, I don't know what kind of a production I would have, but I'm going to do it. Why? I'm still healthy. It's a God-given opportunity. The Gideon's a little different because they require time. I mean, to tell you, anyway, that's...
Well, I'm challenged by the next verse, too, in verse 10, because it says, so then, while we have opportunity, let us do good to all men. Because the question is, who should you do that for? Well, it says here, I should do it for everyone, but then especially to those who are of the household of faith.
That's correct, and you probably stole my thunder. But when we talk about money, God says you're missing the boat. He says, yeah, the money's part of time. My interest in you is you're going to get 70 years, 25,550 days. Each day he pulls another day off of the chart. Why do you say that you don't have enough time? He says, see, my days are determined, the number of months is with thee. He has appointed my bounds I can't pass. A day will get up, I'll put my shoes on that night, somebody else will take them off. God says, I'm investing in you, and I have an investment. I wouldn't want to steal their thunder. And this investment doesn't apply to the money I have. It applies to how I use it, how I use my time. Why? Because I'm in my course. And so God, the Word of God says, let's go over to 1 Corinthians chapter 4. In verse 7, for who maketh thee to differ from another? And what hast thou that thou didst not receive? All of a sudden, it dawns on me that everything that I have has been given to me by somebody else. Then Jesus makes a statement to you. He says, if you can't be trusted with what another man has, how can I ever give you the true riches? If you don't grasp the fact that it's not your money, it's not your house, it's not your children, it's not your life, it belongs to Him, but it has to deal with a mindset. My mindset has to be changed. Break up the fallow ground. Why? Because when I come with a mindset, I come with a historical mindset that I've always thought. God keeps dealing with me. He says, you got to keep changing the way you think. I said, I'm too old. He said, you're still alive. I said, well, you win. So if thou didst receive it, why dost thou glory as if thou had not received it? So he says to me, look, here's an interesting observation. Seed produces a harvest. When I begin to deal with that, this is what brings it. Faith brings it. Seed is what God multiplies. Faith is why God multiplies it. So when I get into the increase factor here, I got into it. Most people would say, can you get into something? They say no because they don't have enough. Everybody, whenever somebody is asked something, everybody grabs their wallets. Normally in everything I've been involved in, we start out with what we don't have. We really can't do that because we don't have. Then the list comes out. I was involved with, I found a campaign. We needed $70,000. We divided that. What we were trying to do was divide it out, and souls came out $12 a soul. We finally figured what we would do. We agreed at the table. One guy sitting over here said, now listen to what happened that shot a hole in the whole thing. He said, what happens if it doesn't work? What's game plan 2? You could feel the air going out of the tires. This guy was one of the guys that said, look, too many giants, we can't go it, so they all left. We went to a guy who had a lot of money, and he said, how much is that converted into souls? We said, it's $12 a soul. He says, I'll take $70,000 worth. He bought the whole package. We went out walking on clouds. See, we didn't have the money, but who had it? God has it. This guy was blessed fantastically. You know why? God could trust him with the money. Why could he trust him? He knew that man would not hold on to it. Think about the love of Jesus when we talk about the love of Jesus. If the church of God truly loved Christ, if they did, there wouldn't be a missionary outreach or an evangelistic outreach that wouldn't be fully funded.
I'll throw you into something else, Fred, because I'm a money man and I work with people to help them build up towards a retirement. I've looked at the scriptures. You know more, you've read much more than I have, Fred. I don't know anywhere in the Bible where it talks about building up for your retirement.
Where it
talks about building up for retirement. This is an American concept that I don't know anywhere in the Bible that talks about doing that.
But there's another word attached to retirement. Where I get my coffee in the morning, they always have a trivia question. If you can answer a question, they give you the 10 cents off. What's the word attached to retirement and money? security. Our mindset today is 65 and I don't have an income. I've been away from my company for 2 or 3 years. I've never made more money. Why? Because my goal was to give more. I made a commitment to this church when he built it that was a big commitment for me at my age. The Lord said, you better start not thinking about pledges for X number of years anymore. I finished it this morning. It's over. I could rejoice in that. Why? Because when I said I'm going to do this, God enabled me to do it. Now that it's over, I rejoice. It's over. Why? Because God did what? God enables. God always enables. Now, somebody says, put the seed in simple terms. I understand what you're talking about. I understand money. I understand time. Jesus, the great economist, gave us the defining element of what it is that's your seed. The extra mile. Why do you think he said that? Why do you think he said, let you in a secret? What's the secret? What's the secret to the next step? Oh, he says the secret's the extra mile. I said, how do you fit the extra mile into this economy? He says, it's not economics. He says, it applies to everything that you're doing. No matter what you think about the amount of time that you waste. God says you could always do just a little bit more. For most people, that's not a whole lot. I was on a board of managers when a guy who I highly respected, and all of a sudden, he was a wealthy businessman. He said, I think around this board of managers, everybody on this board ought to trust God and increase their tithe 25%. I almost went through the floor. My knees buckled. I knew he could do it. I said, are you speaking for me? And then when I was on my way home, he said, I said, yeah, he's speaking for me. Oh, that was tough. God says, you know what you do? You always function in the area where you can handle it. Why doesn't he like self-sufficiency? He doesn't like self-sufficiency because it will always keep you from going the extra mile.
It robs us of trusting in him and our faith.
Say it louder.
It robs us in trusting in Christ and our faith.
Now, I just got this. I get a letter in the mail. I know what it is, and when I open it, I'm not surprised. Here's a story about a woman who, a lawyer has written this, about the wonderful life of this lady. I don't know her from a load of coal, and she's Catholic. Go over to Proverbs 3. So I know that when I open that letter, I want to tell you, when somebody asks you for something, I want you to think in these terms. Any request that somebody makes of you is a seed that's planted.
Say that again, please.
Any request that is made of you is a seed that's planted. Now think about that. 3:27. Withhold not good from them to whom it is due, when it is in the power of your hand to do it. When I looked at this Nigerian thing, which just followed the Rwandan, the Sudan thing, Sudan. I said, how much? Instantly the Lord said, I want you to do this. I start going through my program of handling that. Why? Because a request has been made of me. When I thought of this woman and the life that this woman has led, according to this attorney that's interceding in her behalf, because apparently she's terminal, she's in a terrible condition. I have the letter at home, and I put these in a pile. Her request will be later, sometimes, I think, next month. I don't know the woman. Why should I get involved? Why are you calling me? God says I didn't make a mistake. I said, is this seed planting? This is seed planting. Well, shall I send her a check? Oh, it might be better if you go see her. I don't know her. Just keep it before me then. Keep it. I think we'll work it out. God wants to work it out with me. Now, I haven't decided. I had another one about 2 months ago. This little girl is a Christian, terrible condition, all the grief, and tens of thousands of dollars, and they're having a little fundraising for. He that would ask of thee, turn not away if it is in the power of your hand to do it. How can I lie? I think of Ananias and Sapphira. So I do what I'm going to do, and this time I'm going to go and see the little girl. And here she is in this wheelchair. She's delivered her baby, and she's sitting in all this grief. My participation in that, and she doesn't know it, will excite her. It will be anonymous. But my investment in her, because God put that verse in my heart, is going to what? A healthy countenance makes a healthy life. I'd like to see her smile when she gets her pack. Oh, wouldn't that be nice? What am I investing in? Oh, God says, you're investing in her encouragement. I think that's significant. I think that's significant. I've done. I'll give you these in a hurry. These are called characteristics. One, recognize God's message. I'll add this. And the messenger. Recognize God's message and the messenger. 2, listen to his instruction. Now, what that means is don't be hasty. You may get something, say, I gave something last week and throw it. No, God says don't be hasty. If I don't talk to him about it, might have a loss. Then, when I'm asked to do it, it will bring some type of result in the future. And think about this. Your future is based on your faith. So as I begin to look at this thing, and I begin to look at how God is working in these things, I'm going to have to give an account. Now, there are 2 types of people on the face of the earth. Nevertheless, the foundation of God standeth sure. The Lord knows those that are his. But in a great house there are not only vessels of gold and silver, but of wood and earth. Some will be to honor, and some to dishonor. If a man purges himself of these, he shall be a vessel unto honor, fit, I like that word, fit for the master's use, prepared for every good work. When I get there, all this will be chronicled. Remember when you had the, well, I didn't have time. I really couldn't get into that because God says, always remember that any time that somebody asks you for something, you're going to plant seed. Now you say, look at the pile of stuff no. I can go to God and say, is this something? No answer, no participation. Is this something? Think so. How should I participate in it? Time, money, effort, influence, a lot of things that you have that you don't use. You see, how are you going to use this stuff? He says, all those, reputation. I know that people will call and say, in fact, I've certain words when it's anything more than about than that. Whatever it is. So it isn't that I go overboard and start a guilt trip thinking what I could do. What I do, I have to go back and consult with what I've got as to how I use it. You see. Why? Because ultimately, he says, you really love me. Well, how did I love you? You remember that little girl in a wheelchair? Yeah. He said, if you've done it, the least of these, you've done it to who? To me. I carry this little tract. I've given out tons of them. Why? Because it's a cup of cold water. I can do that. That's something I could do. I don't know why everybody doesn't care something they can give away. It doesn't cost anything. So when God begins to add it up, there's this vastness that consists of you. Your reputation, your influence, your money, your family, your attitudes, your position, your stage, age, so on. Gives me a lot to think about. So Dan, why don't you close it?